themed Shakespeare's Roundtable discussion today. We're talking about The Merchant of Venice. And today we have some of the cast and crew of Roslyn Hicks' fully online production of the play. Here we have Roz herself, Geoff Sirmai, who plays Shylock, the Jewish moneylender, and the merchant himself, Haki, Pepo, Crisden, who plays Antonio. So my first question today is for Roz. What drew you to direct this play in particular?
Well, as a Christian myself, for me, I felt there were a lot of important issues raised by the play. But until recently, I hadn't actually read all of the play. Before then, I really only knew Portia's famous courtroom speech about mercy, which I thought, what a great speech. Like, I very much agree with that. But in the context of the whole play, I was suddenly uncomfortable. So I guess that kind of drew me to do it, because I really care about like society being able to be tolerant of, like true tolerance of other people's views, and that being able to say, yes, we have different opinions, we believe different things, but that doesn't mean we should treat each other badly. So yeah, that led me to want to do this play and have a variety of viewpoints in the cast as well, which we did, which was great. So yeah.
And you'd already done lots of shows with Stream Shakespeare.
Yes.
Lots.
I think 8.
Roz is one of our regulars.
Why not direct one?
It's been quite a different experience directing than as opposed to acting.
Yes, it feels like there's a lot more responsibility.
Yeah. Haki, did you want to talk about your background? I think that's probably the most interesting of all of them.
Were you talking about my religious background there? I'll get to that in a moment. But let's see. So I'm American. I've lived here in Australia for about 13 and a half years. My professional background has actually been in journalism. I've been an editor of various types of publications for, I don't know, something like 25, 26 years at this point. I got heavily into acting about 5.5 years ago. I do some directing as well. I've directed a show for Stream Shakespeare. My religious background is probably, will probably be of some interest to people watching this. I grew up in my early years too. I was about 13 in the Church of God and Saints of Christ at Temple Bethel, which might surprise you to hear that that's a Jewish institution. We were frequently referred to as, quote, the Black Jews in America. It's founded out of the Reconstruction era, when, I mean, the whole archetype, you will, of the wandering tribes really, really appealed to the founder of that church. And he brought with, almost all of the former slaves and first generation descendants of the former slaves were Christian, because that was the religion granted to them by slave owners. So he introduced a religion that was founded on Jewish traditions, but also did have some Christian tenets, because they were so tied to the Christian church. So, Sabbath on Saturday, yarmulkes, Yom Kippur, all of it. Passover was an enormous event, actually. That was an interesting thing, as opposed to a small, intimate ceremony at home. That definitely raised a few eyebrows in my youth, and I'm sure it still does now.
Fabulous.
What was that, Geoff?
I just think it's fabulous. I just think it's wonderful. I shared with Haki while we were preparing for the play, a short story by Bernard Malamud, wonderful American Jewish novelist, called Angel Levine, which was about an old Jewish couple where everything's gone wrong, and they're challenged by the arrival of this African-American Jewish angel who appears, and it's a challenge to his faith to believe that such a thing is possible. But the moment he's convinced and he sees the faith and he sees all the spirituality, suddenly everything changes, and he walks back into his apartment and his wife is fine, the sun is shining, and the sort of affirmation of faith that his final words were, "Believe me, say there were Jews everywhere."
Yeah.
And it's just an interesting thing about what we have in common, and what we often have as our roots.
Yeah. Very true.
For me, as a sort of lifelong atheist, I'm just astonished at how strong the Jewish community is in Sydney, because doing this project has really made me aware of that, and it's such a warm and quite inclusive and diverse and interesting and very, I think, tightly knit community, which is, I think, something that is often lacking in Australia in the modern day. I think there are not that. But maybe that's just my experience as an atheist, that I'm sort of always feeling kind of adrift.
Sorry. Keep going. We have a limited amount of time. Everyone in Hamilton.
This is one of the beauties of Stream Shakespeare, and I'm sure of Dunera, and of all of our lives over the last 6 months, of pets making a funny appearance.
What you say is very true, Holly, which is that, look, it's a rich community. And I think it's a wonderful example of multiculturalism in Australia, the communities that come from, often as refugees, can recreate with a sense of identity, still within a land to which they're very grateful, a whole very stable and very cultured environment. And so that's an interest in Shakespeare, an interest in plays like this one is, of course, sort of prime. Whenever there's anything that's got, let's call it a Jewish angle, a Jewish interest. It's fascinating not just to engage with it from a Jewish communal point of view, but also to consider how it is interacting with the rest of the world that views it, and what that impression is that's coming out. Hence, the sort of things that are high on the list of interesting angles about this play.
Yeah, and I think some of the most interesting angles are the thorniest as ever. We've talked a little bit about this question of this sort of key question of whether this is, it's obviously a very problematic play, but is it an anti-Semitic play, as some people claim, or does it endorse anti-Semitism, or does it just portray it? And this is a question that we've kept coming back to in rehearsals and in preparation for this talk. And Haki, I know you've done a lot of thinking on this topic as well. And it's so interesting having you two here, Geoff and Haki, because you're obviously representing in the play, your characters are representing these two kind of polar opposites. And Antonio, the merchant, eventually kind of crushes Shylock quite in a kind of awful way. But our empathetic response to that is very interesting, I think. And I think that you were very interested in that, Ros, when you were coming to direct it, as I understand.
You mean in terms of what the outcome with? Yeah,
and how the audience feels about Shylock's trajectory as a character.
Yeah, like I guess the big thing for me was like I didn't want to ignore the history that's there, like the history in Venice at the time. I didn't want to ignore the kind of oppression that Shylock and his community had experienced. Mm. But at the same time, I wanted to just portray people as three-dimensional human beings. I didn't want to stereotype anybody and just be like, oh, well, because this character is Christian, of course they act like this, or this character's Jewish, of course they act like this, because I think that's what creates so many issues today with all different types of prejudices that exist, is that we jump to assumptions about people based on a label. So that was my main thing, that I really wanted every character to be complex, and that while it doesn't excuse the prejudice, there are like complicated reasons as to why people behave the way they do and think the way they think. So hopefully that came across without it. Like I certainly wasn't wanting it to come across like, oh, therefore we can excuse people's prejudices or we can justify it. I didn't want to say that, but yeah, just to perhaps make every character in some way understandable so that
I think that came through really strongly, Ross. I mean, from my coming to this with a stake in it, as you can imagine, I'm well aware of the history of it and the way in which lots of art can be used, for evil or for good. But very much, reassured by that nuanced three-dimensional approach to everything. The characters say, they speak, they come to life, and we see them as they are. And it's all there in the text. I'm just a big believer that Shakespeare is such a genius, such a ahead of his time writer and an observer of human nature, that it doesn't take much to look and find the conflict within characters, the difference. And yes, there are moments where terrible things are said and terrible things are done by Shylock as well, obviously, as by those to him. But how it gets to that is fascinating. And the conflict of the various characters is there right from the beginning with all of the various characters. And Jessica, even Lancelot, the very first things that both of those characters say, even though they may betray him in the end, if you like, in a sense, shows that they're deeply conflicted with their conscience, with their identity, right from the go-get. And that gives them that three-dimensional aspect. And once we let the characters speak for themselves and we place them in the context as you did, we can see that it's a play about, and I think strongly, it's a play about anti-Semitism and many other things, of course, but it's about, with respect to that, it's about it, and it's not anti-Semitic, quite the opposite. I think it's extraordinarily ahead of its time. There are much worse examples, if you like, of two-dimensional Jewish characters in literature and theatre, where Shylock gives a good account of himself, and others feel conflicted when they speak against him at times as well. So it has something in there for you to find if you look beyond just a very blinkered approach, I think.
Your performance of Shylock, though, really brought that empathetic quality out. I mean, initially we think, oh, what an awful man. And then as the play goes on, we start to empathize with his point of view more and more. And we feel sorry for him when his daughter runs away and steals all his ring that his dead wife gave to him when they were courting. It's a heartbreaking moment that she's just kind of thrown it away with no respect for you.
You can forget he's a single parent. He's a single widower, with a wayward, not even wayward, I think just exuberant teenage daughter, who's in love. This, throughout the world, let alone literature, is a recognisable thing. And we get Shakespeare lets us see him in light-hearted, mood in the house, in his own home, jesting with the servant and joking with his daughter and teasing her about the keys to the house, and half in fun and half serious about the dangers outside, which are probably very real to him. He's proven right. So it's all there for you to see light and shade, and it's true of all the characters. Very much Antonio is a very interesting character. Don't you agree, Haki?
Yeah, they do. The three-dimensional is really the word to me. It comes for the characters and for the play itself. The play itself, I think, actually one of the things, in addition to people being worried about and being made to feel uncomfortable about anti-Semitism, or maybe even the portrayal of Christianity as embodied within Antonio, which can be, you can look at Shylock and Antonio can both be seen as quite vindictive, if you want to interpret it that way. But also, he adds, you have all the businesses going on with Gratiano and all those characters, which can be looked at as comic relief. But I think within the context of this play is actually more than that. It's a more well-rounded presentation of humanity, which, as you touched on, Geoff, really is something that Shakespeare was an absolute genius at. You don't get the chance to very easily dismiss anyone as all evil or all good or all sympathetic or whatever in this play. And I think one of the keys to really getting what Shakespeare was trying to achieve in this play is really in the title. It's the Merchant of Venice. Venice is a character in this play, in my opinion. The place that it held in the world at that time as this mercantile center where all of these different cultures, met and mingled and intermixed because they had to for trade. Everyone was in that sense dependent on one another. So cultures that probably otherwise would have kept to themselves necessarily had to butt heads for commerce. And that's a theme that you see throughout human history as well. So coming to the specific question of whether it's an anti-Semitic play or a play about anti-Semitism, without sounding too heavy-handed about it, it's frustrating for me when I see this sort of general trend, just people in general conflating depiction with endorsement. I just have a really big problem with that. We have to examine art must examine human nature from many different angles. And I think that you have to be able to approach something and think about what's really being accomplished, what's being said. I think a play like this, and we touched on like both Shylock and Antonio, you can look at their arcs and see them as sympathetic at sometimes very unsympathetic at others, the relationships that they have, the fact that they are both men of faith, but that faith does not keep them from being insufferable at times. It doesn't make them perfect people. So I think when you look at all of that and also look at like sort of the totality of life around them that comes up in the play, I think the only logical conclusion is that Shakespeare was trying to paint a portion here of humanity and some of its highs and lows. And I think he did a fantastic job of it. It has value for 400 years later. It'll have value 400 years from now.
But context always.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a city in a particular time that's wildly hedonistic. For me, it invokes the 80s and greed is good and people making with more money than sense and drinking heavily and gambling and probably drugs and all the things that go into an indulgent lifestyle when people have more wealth than they can handle, especially young people. And that's the world of this play. And I think we can forgive them. Well, we can't forgive them their racism, their misogyny, the various things which we can recognise and think better of now. But in context, we can understand them and we can certainly identify with them.
Yeah. And those things are all still here now. They certainly haven't gone away. The general idea may be that some things are unacceptable, but they certainly haven't gone away.
Even in this week, we're talking about transphobic writers, iconic writers who may well be cast now as transphobic. And all the other failures which we see in literature, which has otherwise been acceptable. I don't think we can pick on the work. As you say, you have to separate the art from the artist, but you also have to look at it with...
what's been going on. Yeah. One thing I want to touch on quick about, just that brings into mind really the way you can interpret things differently in this play. When I was preparing to play the character, things really fell into place for me, just my sort of understanding as Antonio, when I decided that, well, the key for me was when he stands up at the end in the courtroom and they said, what basically they allow him to determine Shylock's fate. It's very easy to look at that as a cruel thing that he delivers to have, his wife going. But from Antonio's point of view, he is literally being Shylock's salvation and his daughter's salvation in that moment. And I think that idea is sort of critical to understanding, at least the way I decided to portray the character, someone really driven by his faith. I think you can look at some of the things Shylock does and says the same way. But yeah, you have to think about it from the way the character is defining their actions. And then that gives you sort of a different insight into what the play's about.
How brilliant of Shakespeare to be able to do that and for us to see that 400, 500 years later. Incredible. Yeah. Can I just remind people who are listening and watching that they can drop in questions or comments in the chat or the Q&A down there? We can respond.
We welcome them. This is a very fluid conversation. We've got a kind of few topics we want to talk about, but we're very happy to be led by you as well.
Questions, please.
That was what Haki just mentioned. That was like one of the big conflicts for me too, was like reading the trial scene and trying to think of every point of view and thinking, well, okay, I guess I can see why they would think, like the others would think that to act like for Shylock to actually seek violence against Antonio seems wrong. But you can understand why he feels the way he does.
Yeah.
And you can understand why he's saying, well, I'm only asking for justice and the law and the thing that you agreed to in the first place. So I was really conflicted about like, well, I can kind of I can understand Portia saying you should be merciful because like you're being offered like 3 times as much as was owed to you, and Shylock sort of demanding his piece of flesh. And yet then, as Haki mentioned with Antonio, like I think Antonio thinks he's being merciful, but then especially from my perspective as a Christian myself, I was like, well, but just telling Shylock that he has to become a Christian doesn't mean that he is one. Like that's so uncomfortable to me because like, you know, faith is a decision of belief. Like, so them just saying that he has to become a Christian doesn't make him one. So I'm like, oh, that's so uncomfortable. I don't.
And for a Jewish audience, that's the most terrific thing at all, because even for Shylock, the money is not the thing, because he's offered 3 times, 10 times, whatever. He doesn't want the money. He's got almost nothing left at this point because he's been totally humiliated. But that's the final humiliation. Yeah. And for a religion that doesn't seek converts, and that you know is always sought after as converts, you know, often on pain of death, viz, you know, the Inquisition and goodness knows what other pogroms and whatever else. It's the ultimate fear, and of course, as you said, Haki. I mean, from a strictly certainly evangelical Christian point of view, it's what the Jews would call a mitzvah. You know, we can make him a Christian. It's the best thing you can do. You know, it's a blessed thing to do that, because from your point of view or from his point of view, that's a blessing. Yeah. But from the Jewish point of view, and we've got this wonderful illustration of it. We can see it palpably in that courtroom scene. As you say, Ros, getting that across is just, you know, amazing writing, but also just in the production of it to make it happen is a fabulous thing.
Yes, Roz, I was going to say that your direction in the courtroom scene, for the whole piece, but the courtroom scene, that was a coup de grace, fantastic. Really came forward well.
Well, I think that was one of the scenes that, sorry.
I can see that he really loved it because he chose it as his background today.
I think that's one of the scenes that really benefited from this format of performing, because it meant you've got a couple of characters that hardly say anything in that scene, but because they're all on the screen together, you could see everybody's reaction. And so even Holly as Nerissa, I loved your reaction. I've watched it so many times to check for things and give notes. And I loved I don't know if you meant this, but your reaction when when Antonio says that he'd presently become a Christian was it was like this great kind of moment of, did he actually just say that? Like there was this great kind of shock and disbelief. And for the audience being able to see all of those nuanced reactions from everybody was really interesting.
I suppose for me as an atheist, having gone to a Christian school when I was growing up, it's very palpable for me as well. There's this fear, oh no, someone's trying to convert me. Because I had it over and over and over when I was a kid. So I sympathize with that. But I wasn't aware that Judaism doesn't seek to convert people. That's
really difficult actually. But no, it really is not a thing. We're quite happy to do our own thing, and that kind of live and let live thing is a very Australian sort of attitude, really, to be honest.
Well, we're kind of like mercantile Venice of the early modern period. We're so diverse, so many different cultures and so many different kind of desires and agendas and everything all mixing in. I mean, and like pre-Inquisition Spain, and these amazing melting pots in Western Europe, and in various periods where everybody got on beautifully, especially in terms of culture and music and theatre and art and poetry, where everybody shared and cross influence. But I was going to say just on subtle performances and beautiful thought, because I know this was very much inspired by your direction, Ros. Chiara playing Jessica, Shylock's daughter.
Beautiful, beautiful. You can often see that as a two-dimensional character who's delighted to convert and take all the daddy's money and then disappear off into the sunset. Just as you can imagine Shylock as being an evil two-dimensional character who's hateful and wants his pound of flesh. So much more than that. But the conflict of Kiara, right from her opening line where she expresses that it's a sin. She knows it's a sin to be ashamed of her father. What a thing to say right at the beginning. Right to the very end when she's with Lorenzo. And the last thing we see, which you beautifully captured with music happening too, is this just kind of feeling of horror, which came across her face of sort of like, what have I done? What's going to happen now? Type thing. She's got her love and all the things on the surface, money and wealth and all the things that came with her running away. But that look on her face is just so heartbreaking.
And she's fingering the cross.
Oh, and yeah, she's got the cross around her neck now, and she's like, which of course was a lovely the opposite to me throughout, wearing my Star of David. That it only takes a moment to get across that subtlety of that, but it's there in the text and it's there in the directions.
Well, yeah, again, that was just that wanting to not treat any character as two-dimensional, but that there were complex reasons why she did what she did, and that there might be, the idea that there probably is regret. So, yeah.
I think you did a great job, Roslyn. I'm proud of hiring you for the job.
Well done, Holly. Well done, all. Hey, what about this format? So we're talking on Zoom now, and there's people watching us. But for those who haven't seen the play yet, and they must, I think the links are there probably in the chat and elsewhere. It's an extraordinary thing to watch a live performance and then on demand, a live performance of anything but Shakespeare with 20 characters or more, with actors all around the world all at the same time, and bringing it together theatrically with music and with video, as you saw. I'm fascinated, Holly, about where you see this having come from and where it's going, because it just seems to grow and become more and more sophisticated.
Well, where it's come from, I mean, obviously we started off at the beginning of the year with just very simple staged readings, and we didn't have these digital backgrounds, and we were people were just literally sitting in their bedrooms with their messy furniture behind them, and very minimal costume and props. And then we've progressed to eventually to now fully realized productions on Zoom. And also using, as you saw at the beginning of this, interpolated video, which is largely thanks to the skills of our wonderful video editor, David Castle. And he's been able to composite green screened separately in isolation videos taken of various different actors and composite them into a virtual space together for certain effects. We also had CGI, which was starting to be used in The Tempest by Alex Perritt, which was extraordinary. It was a staged reading, but it could almost have been a fully realized production. And Geoff was also Gonzalo in that, and we had a roundtable about that if you're interested in seeing any of our other talks.
At one stage, they animated me and put me on a boat in a storm. It was extraordinary. That is exactly the word I was going to use, extraordinary. That's quite a piece of work.
Yeah, and so we're just kind of trying to continually push the envelope and think creatively and think about how we can make the best use of the kind of restrictive but also incredibly freeing in some ways situation that we find ourselves in, because of course we can have actors and contributors from all over the world. Jess, who played our Portia in The Merchant of Venice, is in New Zealand. Obviously, we had to work around her scheduling because she was 2 hours before us, but it worked fine, as long as you got a good internet connection.
Yes.
I think in the future, I'd really like to start experimenting with virtual reality if we can possibly do it. Because there's a production of Edward II, I believe, by Chris Marlowe, which has just been put on YouTube, which you can watch. It's over in England. And they've filmed it's only one short scene, but they filmed it all in 360-degree VR. So You can watch it with VR goggles on YouTube and actually look around, or you can just scroll around if you don't have VR goggles. And I think that the ability to put the audience in the middle of the action is extraordinary and very exciting. And obviously, Zoom's had an enormous influx of new cash into their coffers over the past 6 months. So, yes, I think that they will be investing, if they're sensible, they'll be investing heavily in research and development. And, we might see, but I've seen another company, tech company, that's doing virtual rooms where everyone not only is in a virtual space, but they have their actual face and they're in real time imposed onto an avatar's face. So you can actually be in a virtual room and looking at different people and seeing their faces move, and you can touch objects and present them, and it's extraordinary.
Goodness, it's like Second Life in 3D or something. Wow.
So I think the sky's the limit really over the coming years in this kind of medium for performance.
Yeah.
But Haki, you've directed a show with us. What did you?
Titus Andronicus.
Yeah.
Geoff was the outstanding Titus for that, and Roz had a dual role in that, and so did you. You were all three in that production. Excellent work by all of you. Yeah, one of the things, and Holly and I had a really brief conversation about this as we were doing a build up to it. Was trying to at that point we had done, the things had grown so much from the point that I agreed to direct Titus and Holly brought me on board for that to the time we were getting ready to do it. The technology, the expanse of our use of the technology and everything, and all the bells and whistles had grown so much. I was like, this is enormous compared to what it was when I started to think about it. So one of the things I was actually really glad to hear you say, Holly, was, try to put as much time as you can into actually working with the actors, which is, that's what I really hoped to be able to do anyway. Because, in addition, obviously, with that, the way the actors engage with each other is always important in any theatrical presentation, but particularly in our way, with everything else growing so quickly, and with us having to find different ways to relate to each other, like. You're supposed to be talking to someone face to face when you're looking, you're almost frequently barreling down the camera and stuff like that. You have to work on that. There's craft in addition to that's being made up as we go along, in addition to just the general idea of how we need to act in rehearsal and work things out and workshop stuff. Not losing sight of that and holding on to it is really, really, really important. And as a director, that's the most entertaining thing for me anyway. It's going to be a big challenge for my next production because I've gone crazy with the bells and whistles on that one. So do we want to say what that is, or are we holding on to that?
Well, look, I think we can say that you're intending to do it, whether or not we get the funding for it.
Yeah. Right. Yes, we'll hold it for a tease.
Right. What we can say is that Richard III is coming up on Stream Check.
That's right. Yeah.
And that does have some bells and whistles, but also a lot of very detailed work with the actors. And we've got some extraordinary actors involved in that. Charles Mayer, who has actually been in blockbuster movies as a villain, and various other characters. And he's been on Australian TV quite a lot as well, and in Britain. He's playing Richard III, and it's a wonderful role for any actor to get their teeth into. Benedict Cumberbatch played it to great acclaim back in 2016 for the Hollow Crown series that was produced by the BBC, which is a wonderful series of history plays. They did two series, so Richard II, Henry IV, Part 1, Henry IV, Part 2, and then the second series, which was Henry VI, Part 1, Henry VI, Part 2, and Richard III. And the ability to kind of step into these roles that have so much history behind them. When you think of Richard III, you think of, most people I think of Laurence Olivier performing that role iconically. And we're engaging with these canonic texts that have so much history. You could see it as baggage, but it's fascinating, like multi-layered kind of aspects of, you're not just engaging with a text that was written 400 years ago, 450 years ago. You're also engaging with a text that has been performed hundreds and thousands of times since, in so many different contexts on different continents, with all these ideas. You're engaging in a creative community that stretches back generations when you're performing Shakespeare, which I think is really exciting. And it's exciting to be doing that, engaging with such an old craft with so much history, but in the most ultra-modern way that we can almost imagine.
And for viewers who are watching this, just to put that in context, imagine the interaction between actors, rehearsing, everything that goes into it, especially characters where there's a great deal of intimacy, but understanding and interaction. Most of my fellow actors in these plays, and we've mentioned a few of them, and I've done a few now on Stream Shakespeare, have actually never met in person. We literally seem to know each other so well from many rehearsals and from meeting, even from after parties, virtual after parties, but have not actually been in the same room at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
And that in itself is an extraordinary thing at this time, in this COVID period. When we think about isolation, but this is what can be achieved when you find a way to stretch out and reach. It is mind-blowing.
Yeah, there's been a couple of people that live not far from me that I've happened to see in person, having only met them previously on Zoom.
Yeah.
And it took me a second to recognize them because, people look a bit different in real life, and they have legs. On Zoom, I never see people's legs. So, yeah, there's been a couple of times where I've been like, hey, I know you. Oh, dear.
Yeah, it is quite bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah.
Should we touch on that other thing that we were going to talk about? I mean, there's so much more I want to say about Merchant directly, but or specifically, but also on that whole art versus the artist, that type of thing, in terms of not just the whether what their characters do needs to be endorsed, but actually the artist and their views, which might be repugnant, but they're wonderful art, and the other way around as well too, because we talked about a lot when we were preparing a Merchant, but it comes up in so much of other art and other drama.
If I would talk to that personally, the artist who challenges me on that is always T.S. Eliot. I love T.S. Eliot's poetry to death. I studied it while I was in uni on my own. Absolutely love the stuff. It's very postmodern in the sense of the way he just takes all of these. The heap of broken images as he talks about. That's his art. He's pulling from everywhere to make a narrative about the present day and everything. But I mean, eugenicist. Bitter, brutal, horrible racism and all of that stuff. But I have never, it's odd. I always have seemed to be much easier. I seem to have a much easier time separating art from the artist than most people do. And I actually think that one of the reasons for that is because I'm a huge sports fan. So I grew up used to watching people do amazing things for teams that I supported, and then hearing them say things that I vehemently disagreed with, off the field. I think those sort of things. I think that's sort of trained me for that. But it's I do see the struggle that lots of people have. How can something beautiful come from the mind of somebody that's horrible? But it's what the odd thing to me is when you start out something is beautiful, then you find out someone has a view you don't like, and suddenly it becomes ugly. That's hard for me to process. So, I don't know how you guys interface with that. How do you go with it?
I did my honours thesis on Wagner's Ring cycle, and particularly on the first one in the cycle. And I really struggled during that year. I mean, it's honours year is always a very intense year. But to have to delve into the mind of this narcissistic man, Richard Wagner, who was very anti-Semitic and quite misogynistic, and had a lot of views that I don't agree with, but then created this extravagantly incredible art. I found that very challenging, and I kind of resent that in myself, because I thought that I was, sophisticated enough and educated enough to be able to cope with that dichotomy and hold those two things at the same time. But yeah, I struggled with it, partly because I think I've met some incredibly talented, overbearing, narcissistic men in my life. It reminded me of.
Yeah, and racist, misogynistic, transphobic, whatever type of prejudice. The Wagner one's interesting, because I remember at uni when I was doing my music degree, I organised for the Jewish student body there a debate on whether we should listen to Wagner. And it didn't come out of nowhere. It was a hot topic in Israel at the time, because the Israel Philharmonic was insisting on playing some wonderful Wagner, and there'd been an outcry. Should we be playing Wagner in Tel Aviv in the big hall? Should our national orchestra be, et cetera, et cetera? The same sort of things you might hear on the question of, if he was such an anti-Semite, why should we play his music? And not seeing the sophistication of the separation. And I can understand the emotional response to it. But we had the debate between, I think, myself, but obviously lots of feedback from the audience, and Professor Eric Gross, the late Eric Gross, who was a wonderful, as it turns out, Jewish Viennese composer and lecturer. And he was my lecturer on opera. And he was taking the side that we should listen to Wagner, and I was being devil's advocate, really, for the sake of the debate. But people got very passionate about it. And you can see that this is, it doesn't matter whether it's racism or whether it's misogyny. We were saying this earlier during rehearsal, but it seems to me that performing Merchant of Venice is much less problematic these days than performing The Taming of the Shrew, for instance, in Shakespeare. How to present someone that's not misogynistic. And I've certainly seen productions that have managed to overcome it in various ways, not the least by having an all-female cast and turning things around, but even without going that far. But these are problems right across every type of art, and the moment we start separating it and losing the context of the time or the intent, is when we can get a little bit holier than them.
Yeah. You also have to contextualize it in the time that it was written, because if Shakespeare had made a completely sympathetic play that towards Jewish people that didn't include any stereotypes at all, I think it might not have gone across well with his audience. He might not have been able to sell that play.
It wouldn't have been believable. It wouldn't have been believable in its time at all. Right. In England or in Venice, either way. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's true. One thing I think it is important to parse out on this, I think we are all sort of pretty much in agreement that these plays, they're about life, ugly and beautiful aspects of human nature. So we should embrace them as art. One thing I think it is important to recognize is that people who identify as a member of whatever group that may be considered oppressed in what context may not want to engage with something like that because they just don't want to go through the emotional weight of doing it. That I completely understand, and we should all respect. But that's a different question than whether or not the notion should be performed at all. Sensitivity is something we should all embrace. I think it's important to parse those out.
Something I find very interesting when it comes to directorial interpretations of canonic texts, and here going on with my research, but the idea that you shouldn't perform it in a way that is not the original intention or not in the original style or not that it's imposing some new ideas onto an old work. I think some people have a very strong visceral reaction against that. They don't like they think that it should be sort of sacred in its original form. And I think that's really silly. And I really loved Ros, that you just chose to unashamedly put this this sort of fantasy Venice, modern day Venice, that's kind of a bit like Sydney. And it's not realistic really.
Yeah.
You were not afraid to put your own directorial interpretation on this play, and you even wrote new text, which some people would see as completely sacrilegious. The text, you inserted yourself with a directorial cameo, even though you weren't originally in the show at all.
And look, the main reason for that was, just to like challenge people to link the themes that are brought up in the play to our culture today, which, as we've kind of talked a little bit about, is very much like, someone says something unpopular or controversial, and they're like immediately completely written off as a person. And I think, again, not that I want to excuse the things that some people say, because we do need to hold each other accountable for things said in hatred or in ignorance, or, but I just kind of wanted to relate it to that culture today where we're like immediately in trouble if we say something.
I think, and absolutely. And I think the converse is also absolutely true of what you've done. And that is that unless you can make it clear, because some people will not see it, they need to be directed to it. Unless you can draw those contemporary influences to a production of Shakespeare or any iconic early drama or music, opera, people can too easily reject what's happening in the play as being, that's just of that time, it's irrelevant. And that's the danger of making something two-dimensional. That doesn't relate to us today. No one's ever been hateful like that before. Yeah. Oh, really?
Yeah, right. Well, it's also a bit of a fool's errand with Shakespeare. But I don't care how much we've studied. We don't know. We can't pinpoint the sensibilities of 400 years ago. We don't know. There are too many things that we don't know. So we have to take it and look at it and try to make it relevant to our times. And that's been done time and time again throughout history. So I think you have to do that. I think it's to say that that's not a desirable thing, I think is absurd. And also I think it can create that situation where you go and watch something and you just go, okay, what does that have to do with us? It can make things feel really, really, really anachronistic if you're doing something from like early 20th century that feels really, really dated. That can go over like a lead balloon.
There is a danger, though. I'm to be fair to those people who, we won't call them the Philistines or the hard to convince, but there's a danger you can lose people when you completely reinvent and reinterpret something, reimagine something, and you take it so far outside of what the audience's recognisable context or parameters are that they're lost. And we see that sometimes with plays and with operas occasionally. Some directors that are not that unknown to our viewing audience today. On Danera, there's some wonderful young what should we call them? Very, very daring directors out there doing opera productions, which make people's jaws drop. But that's fabulous. I mean, that's something that brings new audience and brings new people, and maybe just needs to be understood as challenging to some who might not be able to, see beyond a slightly more narrow view of what opera is or has been. But it's valid. Of course, it's valid.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of sit somewhere in between where, like, if I'm going to adapt something or edit it, I don't do very much. Like, I really didn't cut very much out at all. And the things that I did cut were sort of very specific references that just felt much more of the era. Or they were references that I thought, if we've got audience watching it that aren't familiar with the play, just aren't going to necessarily understand that reference. So it still gets the point across without it.
Yeah.
So, I try to do very little in terms of editing because I don't want it too much. Sorry?
Wanted that cameo, though.
Yeah. But that was just inserting something. That wasn't changing.
I think the only time that you have to worry is when you completely lose an audience, but when you don't give regard to them at all. So I think the point at which you've gone too far is the point at which you say, well, I don't care what the audience thinks. This is my view of such and such. Yeah. And if you've lost the ability to empathise or to put your feet in their shoes, then maybe that's being indulgent. But that's a whole separate sort of area of avant-garde interpretation of stuff, which is another discussion again. And again, that's still also controversial because maybe we need to shake people out of their comfort zones too.
Yeah, well, that's an eternal struggle, right? Balancing act. Respect the audience versus be servile or whatever, be driven by.
I think it's very difficult at the moment because there is this very strong urge in everyone's hearts to return to the familiar and the comforting and the that sense of being enveloped in something that you're so you've heard so many times before, and you're because we're all feeling out of sorts. We're feeling like the world has changed remarkably in the last 6 months, and we don't know quite how to deal with it. And I think, from a programming point of view, as artistic director, I was trying to push the comedies and the lighter histories or tragedies or whatever, and problem plays or romances in Shakespeare's canon, that we would perform them first and push and focus on them, because I felt that everyone needed that lift and that bit of enjoyment. Whereas now we're starting to become more we're more comfortable with the medium, I think, and we're more able to explore it in interesting ways. So we're sort of moving into the darker material now with Titus Andronicus, although Haki interestingly did Titus Andronicus as a black comedy, which was a take that I wasn't even sure would work, but it really did.
Yes, I remember you being disappointed that I wasn't going to turn it into just an over-the-top bloodbath. So I'm glad it worked out for you. Well,
Jamie Collette, who's our director for Richard III, has promised me that there will be at least some fake blood in Richard III. So
there you go.
My love of the Rocky Horror Show and the schlocky B movies is going to be satisfied.
Excellent. Yeah.
Maybe we should direct our viewers right now and those who are watching later on to also come back and have a good look at this play if they haven't already. Yeah. Because all the Stream Shakespeares and there've been, as you say, so many productions. How many in total now, Holly?
Yeah, what are we up to?
We've done 14 full plays and we've done 3 other shorter videos, so compilations of monologues or little sort of, we did a Shakespeare, Happy Birthday Shakespeare video at one point, and so 17 shows.
Yeah, amazing. So they're all available online, and if the easiest one-stop shop for that is streamshakespeare.com. But the link for, and there you'll find the links to each of those plays and each of those roundtables and even the trivia quiz, etc. But definitely Merchant of Venice there, but also the link to directly view on demand this production that we've just been in and been talking about, Merchant of Venice, Stream Shakespeare. And a great opportunity to view that and see for yourself whether it is, as we contend, as three-dimensional and contextual and still imaginative and true to the text, as we say.
Even though paradoxically it's in the most two-dimensional medium.
True that.
Yes.
And you're very welcome to also contact us, streamed.shakespeare@gmail.com, if you've got any questions or you'd like to get involved. If you're an artist and you think that you would like to contribute, that would be fantastic. Always looking for more directors. Hint, hint, Geoff. And graphic designers, people who can create these beautiful backgrounds you see. This was done by Alice Chu, who's in Amsterdam, but she's busy at the moment, so we don't really have too much in the way of graphic designers at the moment.
We have composers too, don't we?
Yes, we're just about to release an album, actually, Stream Shakespeare album, by the composer of the music for Merchant of Venice, Paul Bremen, and he's based in Cologne in Germany. He's an old friend of mine, and he has written the music to 4 or 5 Stream Shakespeare shows, and he's now put it all into an album format. So we're just finalising the release in the next few weeks. And we're going to keep producing plays into next year. I think however long this coronavirus crisis lasts, and possibly beyond.
Indeed. And I can see that the lovely Nathan from Genera has put all these links in the chat as well too, so if people want to cut and paste them, they can. But as Holly said, streamshakespeare.com is the easiest one to start with. And there's an email, as you heard as well too, and even the opportunity to donate and to keep on track and to be involved in the crowdfunding of these productions, because as you can imagine, they are done on the smell of an oily rag.
Hopefully we'll get one of the grants that I've been applying to so assiduously, and we'll have a budget for special effects that Haki wants.
Yes, well,
Yes.
from your mouth to God's ears.
That's right. Lots of ducats. Ducats.
Ducats.
We all just need a Porsche.
Many patrons of the arts are always welcome.
Oh, yeah, any patrons very welcome to contact us as well. Thank you. And on that note, I think we'll call it a day. Thank you very much for listening to us. I hope you enjoyed our chat. And please check us out online and get in touch if you want to.